Now that we know that stories and one version is not actually the best way to tell it, I want to tell some different versions. Here we're looking at West Africa's medieval empires from our textbook, Freedom on My Mind. Starting on page 15, but we're going to scroll down to this area. Well, let me show you this map because I like maps. I want to know, has anybody ever driven across the United States? So think about that. Keep that question in mind. Look at where Ghana is, and look at where Egypt is, and look at where Mecca is. Well, you can't see it, but it's way over there on the right side of the map. And then I want to come down in this section of our book that talks about Mali. And Mali, I don't know if you caught this part. Check it out, right? This king, the story of his legend, it was transcribed into a movie that we're probably all familiar with, The Lion King. Amazing, right? Sundiata, who was the ruler and king of Mali, and his children, and then his grandson, really. His son brought in some information, or brought in the idea of accepting the Muslim faith, Islam. And then here it talks about Mansa Musa. And I want to pause right there because it doesn't go very well into the story of Mansa Musa, who made the map, literally made the map in the medieval world in the 1300s. I've got all these other books that can talk to us about Mansa. And Mansa means king. And I want to share a story from this book, although these other books have some great stories as well. So again, Mansa means king. His name was Musa. And here in the African history of Africa, Zainab Badawi gives us this idea, and maybe like in the TED Talk, the persistent myth that south of the Sahara, somehow Africa existed beyond the known world and was cut off from the global economy. Not true, right? And this is where I first learned about Mansa Musa, from Karinga's book. Karinga, by the way, very notable, talented scholar. So here he's talking about Mansa Musa, and Mansa Musa went from Timbuktu, important place of learning, Timbuktu. Timbuktu was a school of the empire. Sundiata and his children, Mansa Musa, helped create it. But this is where I learned about his journey, Mansa Musa's journey, all the way across North Africa, right, and further. So again, Mansa Musa, the king, went from Mali. Basically, we'll imagine he started in Timbuktu and traveled across North Africa all the way to Mecca here in Saudi Arabia. Sorry for the blurriness. And the reason I asked if you've ever driven across the United States, which I did basically when I moved from Mobile, Alabama to Los Angeles, California back in the 90s. So Mansa Musa traveled across the United States and then some, across Italy, what would have been Eastern Europe, and then over to Mecca. A long ride in the 1300s. No cars, people. But this is the part of the story I want you to get. Perhaps you've seen, I'm a Marvel fan, Black Panther, The Real Wakanda. In 1324, Musa, the 10th Mansa, or king of the West African Empire of Mali, began a 4,000-mile pilgrimage to Mecca. Before his Hajj, the African and Muslim worlds had heard little about the emperor who had united many parts of modern-day Mauritania and Mali, and Europeans had no clue who he was. But after this trip, Mansa Musa literally put the kingdom of Mali on the map, as I showed you earlier, and that map's in our textbook. And to this very day, historians universally consider him the wealthiest human being in all of human history. Born around 1280 as Kanga Musa, a name that refers to his mother, Kanku Hanidu, Musa was born into the matriarchal Mandinka society. Matriarchal means women are leaders, right? Right. Although his father was not a royal, Musa was appointed a deputy to the empire and assumed the throne in 1312 when the previous king took a pilgrimage to Mecca and did not return. If you Google it, you'll find some pretty cool things out there. All right, so I decided to be easier to read this way. While Europe was slowly emerging from poverty, war, disease, and the Great Famine that killed 1 in every 10 Europeans between 1315 and 1316, Musa was building universities, mosques, and city centers throughout the Empire of Mali. Instead of conquering land through war, he expanded his empire through annexation as he used his control of gold and salt to connect disparate city states into one empire. It is said by the end of his life, it would have taken an entire year to go from one end of Mali Empire to the other. Because of this, Mansa earned more titles than LeBron James. He was called Emir of Mele, Lord of the Mines of Wangara, Conqueror of Granada, Lion of Mali. The only titles he never earned were Best Rapper Alive, Mother of Dragons, and the hardest working man in show business. At its height, scholars say, the kingdom had 400 densely populated cities in the Niger Delta. The University of Sankore in Timbuktu, Mali, still stands. Still stands. 1,300 years. 1,300 until now. So yeah, 1,300 years. Still stands where he built it after conquering the area. Most accounts say that he took 60,000 men on his Hajj with him. Hajj is a pilgrimage to Mecca. Again, Mecca's in Saudi Arabia. That's all the way across Africa and then down halfway through Saudi Arabia. Most accounts say he took 60,000 men on his Hajj with him and balled out along the way. Never one to be stingy with his money, Musa is reported to have handed out gold bars to poor people along his travel route. He handed out so much gold that he destroyed the economies of the areas where he was. But he went back to fix those economies by helping them out. King Musa handed out so much gold to the poor, it actually collapsed the entire gold market in the Middle East. So what did he do to fix this? And perhaps the greatest money move ever made, the king borrowed all the gold his crew could carry from Cairo. Of course, he didn't need it, but then it created the scarcity. The scarcity of the precious metal settled the market. Then, like the baller he was, he simply repaid the Egyptian money lenders back, plus interest. I'm sure he also included a note that said, "My bad, I'm not used to hanging out with broke people." When he returned to Mali, Musa brought some of Spain and Egypt's most prized architects and builders, creating an even wealthier kingdom. Historians say that by the time he returned from Mecca, he controlled most of the gold and salt in the Mediterranean. Coincidentally, this is when the Kingdom of Mali began showing up on European maps. How and when Mansa Musa died is a topic of fierce debate, but in our extensive research, we could not determine whether Mansa Musa released his tax returns. So that's Harriet's view of the story, and it's a precious story. And if you don't know why salt was so important, Google it. Why is salt as important as gold, or why was it so back in the 1300s? Make it a good moment.